Hello and welcome to the last of this short series of rock masterclasses on Capital. In this series we've invited 5 famous musicians to come to the Duke of York's Theatre to let us in on some of the tricks of their trade. My name's Tony Hale, and as well as talking to today's master, I'll be introducing a couple of guitar students who'll play along with our guest and pick up a few tips from his good advice. Now, since guitar is still very much the archetypal rock instrument, I think it's fair enough that 2 out of our 5 masters are guitar players. And what guitar players? We already heard a couple of weeks ago from Steve Howe of Asia. And to finish this series, I'm immensely proud to introduce from Queen, Brian May. Seems to work all right,
yes,
Brian?
It works, fine.
Well, welcome to Capital's Masterclass, Brian. One of the things that characterises some rock guitarists, some rock bands, is rows and rows and rows of guitars at the back. Now, you don't have that, and in fact, the guitar you're playing tonight is quite celebrated, isn't it? Why is that?
It's the only one of its kind because it was made by me and my father about 20 years ago, and it's still the only one that I use. And more or less the only one I can play, to be honest.
What was it that you wanted from a guitar when you set about building?
I wanted something which would have a wide range of sounds. That was the first thing. And having played my rich friend's guitars, I knew roughly what was available. There was the Telecaster, which had a very cutting, thin kind of sound, and there was a certain kind of... There were also Gibsons at that time, which had the thicker sound. Yeah. And the Strat, which had a particular kind of singing tone to it. And I wanted to try and get everything if I could. And I thought to myself, what could it be? It must be something to do with the pickups. It must be something to do with the wood that you make it from. So again, we experimented. And at that time, it was just the beginning when people were experimenting with feedback. And one of the requirements of the guitar was that it should feed back in the right sort of way. So if you turn it up and have a lot of amplification behind you, it would give you that sustained sound, which is now very important to what I do. It turns the guitar from an amplified acoustic guitar into something completely different, into a different instrument which can sustain like a violin can. It has a fair amount of sustain to start with. So I can show you if it's just amplified very slightly. It'll sustain a fair bit because there's not too much of the energy getting away any place. And if I play a couple of notes, it'll go... And you can hear that last note just trailing away. But if I turn up, the ratio of regeneration gets over 1, and that's where it happens.
So it would just go on unless you stopped it?
Yes. And you can even start off with it very quiet, and the feedback will make it grow, which is something that Jimi Hendrix was very good at, who was one of my big heroes and still is. So I can show you. At low volume, it's like this. At high volume, it's like this. Now, in that particular instance, the feedback actually changed the note and put it up an octave.
Yeah, it seemed to produce a new note, didn't it?
Which happens sometimes, yes, because there must be something about this particular setup here and the stage and everything, which means that the note an octave higher than the one I was playing just gets amplified more than anything else. You know, there's lots of different factors. And that's, to me, one of the things which is good fun about playing in different places, because you get such a different response from everywhere. And you never know quite what's going to happen. And on a good night, good things happen, and you can take advantage of them.
We've got a question, Brian, from Graham Saunders of Orpington.
Okay. Yes, Brian.
Hi, Graham.
I've always wanted to know, why do you use old 1960s sixpenny pieces instead of ordinary plectrums?
I experimented with lots of different picks and plectrums, and when I began, it seemed like a good idea to have them very flimsy and bendy, because I thought it would help me speed-wise, because they would just bend and I could keep my hand pretty stiff. But I found after a while that you got more feeling by having no give at all in the pick. That's just the way I feel anyway. And if you hold them in a certain way, the flexibility comes from the grip. And that means that everything that happens at the string the contact between the sixpence, between the pick and the string, gets reflected into your hand, and you get a very intimate feeling about the strings. You know, you just know everything which is going on there, and I find that helps me. And the kind of picks that I used to wear down until they were sort of round anyway. They start off triangular and they would end up round, and I found that I preferred them when they were round because they didn't get caught in the strings. They would always be mobile. So one day I suppose I picked up one of these sixpences, and it worked just as well. And it's also cheaper. It's much cheaper.
More difficult to find nowadays.
You know, you can still get them from banks and things because they don't want them, you know. But also you get a bonus with this sixpence because although it's softer than the strings, it's made of a soft alloy and the strings are steel. Although it's soft, it has this serrated edge, and if you turn it edgewise, then you get a nice on the beginning of the note, which gives you quite a nice bit of distinction. So that's part of what's helped me get a certain sound. I can show you how it sounds. Normally it would sound smooth like this, but with this thing it sounds like more. It gives that nice little serration, which gives you distinction when you turned up loud, because that's one of the problems. You can get your sustain by turning up loud, but sometimes you lose the clarity and distinction, and you get a little bit of it back by using this.
That's amazing. Now, if 2.5p or 6penny pieces ever disappeared,
yes,
what would you do then?
There'd always be something. I can play with anything. I can play with nickels and dimes and anything really. It doesn't make much odds.
All right, thanks, Graham, very much indeed. You've never had a conventional rhythm guitar player in Queen. You've done both bits.
I am the rhythm guitar player.
Yeah. Yes. But you do that while playing solos. I mean, that's more difficult. That's
the way that my style has grown up, and that happens to anyone who's in effectively Queen is most of the time a three-piece with a singer. I mean, Freddie now plays a lot more piano, which helps a lot in all ways. But for a lot of the stuff, it is a three-piece instrumentally, and that's what you get thrown into. Yes, you find that you're doing chords, and you're trying to push the whole thing along and give it some bottom and some push. You know, you're playing with the bass and drums, and then at points you're stretching out and doing some solo work. And you have some of the time to leave kind of chords at the bottom end of the guitar hanging around while you develop on single string. Yes, I suppose that does happen. Yes, yeah, it's not really conscious, but I think that does happen. Yes, you find yourself halfway a lot of the time going jing, and then do on top while it's ringing on. While it's still ringing. That can only be done to a limited extent because the nature of a highly amplified guitar, to get all this sustain and all this sustain, means that you're all the time fighting against this intermodulation distortion. Maybe I should show you what that is, because this is the kind of thing you don't want. If you're ringing with an open E string, for instance, you can hear the top notes get very strangled, that horrible sort of gurgling sound, and that's what you don't want. So always you have to somehow reach the compromise where you can lift that bottom string and let the thing fly off without losing... I don't know, I can't really put it into words, but somehow you can do the heavy things at the right time and do the floating things at other times. I don't know, I can't do it here. I need my group to show you. Who happened to be here? No. Can you do it a little bit, in case they were out there? Let me see, what kind of thing happens? It's a little hard to imagine. I think I get away with it by doing half chords, so 2-note and 3-note chords. There are certain chords which don't actually sound too bad under high amplification circumstances. The first one, there are certain intervals which you become aware of, And the first one is the fifth. And the perfect fifth sounds nice to the human ear. It's this. The two together sound like this. It sounds almost like one note. It's a two-string chord. Yeah. They sound nice to the human ear for a very good reason, and that is because they're harmonically related, which means that if you find out what frequency they are, one frequency is a simple multiple of the other. So in the case of the fifth, it's 3 to 2. The octave is 2 to 1, as everybody knows, probably. That's the simplest one. But the fifth you can also get away with. And the fact that they are harmonically related means that this intermodulation garbage, which generally messes up the notes, happens to come out at a very nice frequency too. It comes out as a note which is part of the chord. Mm-hmm. So you can get away with playing a fifth at any volume you like. So I can play it soft. I can also play it very loud. It sounds like a loud guitar, but it doesn't really have that nasty distortion.
Sure.
So if I tried to do that with thirds, it would sound very different. Maybe I can just show you that. Now, the third is also harmonically related, but not quite as closely, so it begins to sound a bit nasty. If I try something else, like a minor third, it'll sound even worse. A really horrendous noise.
Yeah.
So you get to know what you can get away with at high volume, and I suppose that's part of what it is. And also the fact that the sixpence can clean up, you know, this pick that we were talking about, that can clear up things, because if you just hammer away on certain things, they would sound pretty distorted. So if I do this, that particular chord's got a lot of strange harmonics coming out in it, but if I just stroke it and get this clean sound with the edge of the sixpence, it cleans it up a certain amount, so it goes. So there's lots of little tricks which after a while I suppose become unconscious.
Right.
And you know what you can get away with and what sounds terrible.
All right, well, we're working tonight on Capital Radio's Rock Masterclass with Brian May, and Brian's going to talk to two guitar players during today's programme, and the first one has a very special guitar that we're going to talk about. Will you welcome Julian Hemingway from Leicestershire?
Yeah!
Julian, come and sit down.
Yes, thank you.
Straight away, even to the untutored eye, yours is a Brian May copy, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
Why did you build that?
Well, it was just that Brian seems to get such a unique sound from his guitar that it was the obvious choice, because I like Queen music.
And you started out building that how long ago?
It's been finished about a year, but it took me over 18 months to finish it.
So more or less the same time that it took Brian and his dad?
Exactly the same. It was evenings and weekends, you know.
Okay, can you just explain to Julian then what you want him to play and then how you want him to play?
Okay, I found this piece because a lot of people have asked me about how things like Procession and our version of God Save the Queen and everything were done with multi-track guitars. I thought it would be fun to build up something which hadn't been done before. And I found an old, it has to be 16th century, I think. It's a piece which is done by various sort of early music consort groups in different forms. And there's a version of it which I have on record, which was arranged by Peter Warlock as part of one of his suite. And it's a Pavan, which used to be a kind of very slow, courtly dance.
Yeah.
So I found this little thing, and I thought it would be very nice for us to try and play it. It's very simple. It doesn't involve any string bending or anything clever. But I thought if we each learned one part, we could do it as a three-part, and we're almost a string quartet, but not quite.
Right. And we have, in fact, earlier this afternoon, we showed those parts to us.
Yes, we've already been playing around with them.
They did some work.
Yes, and we're going to, the fourth part is going to be taken up by a drum box, which is one of those wonderful inventions, which means you can do without drummers. They don't even get drunk, it's great. So you can turn this thing on. Can you just give us a demonstration of the drum box? Thank you. So we've put a pattern into that earlier, which will be the basis which we'll use for playing over. It'll just keep us together, because it's one step better than a metronome. You know, a metronome has no feel, but that has at least a little bit of a spring to it. Well, Julian, we will ask to play what is effectively the tune. It's the top line, and it goes like this. So do you want to have a go at that, Julian? Yes, I think it's a good idea to have a little bit more of the treble on it, actually, because it gets a bit woolly otherwise. And you have to imagine the timing going. Do you want to try it with the drum box?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay, drum box, please. I'll count you in. 1, 2, 3, 4. That sounds great, yes. Later on, this is fine when we're doing it quiet, but we're going to turn up later so that we do get the sustain. And the problem, which we're already getting there a little bit, is that other strings tend to feed back. So you have to make sure to use the heel of the hand a little bit to check any things which start feeding back on their own.
Yeah.
So you're actually holding back some of the power that's trying to come through the string.
Yes, that happens. When you turn up loud, you'll get strings coming out which you didn't want because they're open, particularly open strings. So if you turn up a guitar and don't touch it, it'll do like this. And you get all kinds of stuff which you don't want.
Yeah.
And that's already beginning to happen there. Should we play it together once then?
Yeah, sure.
1, 2, 3, 4. What would normally happen is, that happens twice, that has a little repeat sign around it, and the bit which ties the whole thing up is this. It goes... What a sad little piece. So if we want to try that now. On your own. It just happens a little quicker. There's a little spring. It just goes down. Bum, ba, da, da. Just like that. Yes. And you're doing a little hammer on here, aren't you? Which I think is nice. And it's very often... This is very simple playing, you know. And there's none of the old, which is good in a way, I think, because you can concentrate on each note having its value. And sometimes it's better to actually pass over notes a little more than you would expect. You know, in a way, sometimes you're taught. I know that a lot of people are taught to strike every note as you learn to play the guitar, but it's not always a good thing, because if you go like this, I think it doesn't have nearly as much feeling as going... Just doing that actually helps, because that's one of the things which the guitar has as part of its sound, so why not use it?
Sure.
You can get... It's just like a human voice. A lot of things about the guitar are like a human voice. You can... You know, you don't attack every note when you're singing with the same ferocity. You glide over some. And the guitar also can do this gliding in pitch, which is wonderful, which we're not using here, this kind of... but I think the more expression you can get out of a guitar, the better for things like this. And although there aren't guitar quartets, as far as I know, in the world at the moment, I could see it happening at some time.
I can see it happening today.
You know, you have violin quartets, and I mean string quartets, and violin, viola, cello, bass. So I don't see why you couldn't have a very similar thing with guitars. So maybe we're going to set a trend here.
What was the first record you ever played along to?
I can't remember exactly, but it was probably, let me think. Lonnie Donegan was very big for me, and I started strumming his songs, and Tommy Steele at that time. See I'm older than you think, see?
What about instrumental stuff? What about you talking about the Shadows and the Ventures? Can you remember playing along to that stuff?
Yes, definitely. I used to play all those things. Let me show you. They had this great thing with the wang bar, with the tremolo arm, you know, and it used to go... all that sort of stuff, you know.
That's lovely.
Which I used to play, and you had to have a copycat echo chamber to go with it. that's when I started with AC30 amplifiers.
Because now anybody who's not absolutely aware of what a Vox AC30 is only has to look at almost any picture of a 60s group.
That's right, yes.
And those black
things,
boxes behind
yes.
them are AC30s. You appear to own most of the ones left in the world.
No,
How many have you got?
We have 14 or 15, I think.
And you use a line of these. I mean, at the moment here in the Duke of York's Theatre, you're using, how many? 4 of those.
Yes, all for different things, though. I'm using one for the straight-through sound.
Yeah.
I'm using one for the return from a little box which is called a Boss pedal, which gives a very gentle phasing. Maybe I can show you what that
Sure
does.
thing.
This is what it's like with it off. It's quite a subtle effect, I tell you. You have to listen hard for it. But it gives it a little bit of colour. This is the normal sound. And then with it on, it sounds like this. And maybe you can just hear it floating around. It just makes it go very subtly.
It's just a bit richer.
Yes, and it's also very nice both on records and on stage because it spreads the sound spatially. So on the records, very often if we want just one guitar for a rhythm track, I put it through this device and it sounds like two very tightly together. And we use that effect on stage as well, and we have just left and right in the stereo.
Yeah.
And it gives just a bit of movement. It just helps the sound of the guitar.
And that's 2 of them. We've still
So
got
that's
2
two
to
of
go.
them. There's another 2 for the returns from 2 other boxes which we have, which used to be called echoplexes, and which used to be echoplexes, which were mechanical devices with extra heads on. But nowadays we use some very nice digital equivalents, which are made by MXR, who kindly lent them to us for tonight. And what they do is they produce a single repeat of what you've just played.
Uh-huh.
So in the old days you used to have an echo chamber which went nyek, 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 nyek after you've played it. But this thing, you will play a note and it will come back to you as you played it. And according to where you set the delay time, it'll come back any time you want. So maybe we can just show what happens with one of those things. So I can play a note or a chord, and it comes back just as it was. I can play a phrase. So it'll come back to me just whenever I want, and I can also play along with it if I want. I can play harmony to it, so I can go... You can do other stuff as well. You know, you were talking about doing rhythm and lead, where you can play some rhythm and then you can play lead on top. So I can go... So you can do lots of things. And if you have a long delay, you can actually play a whole... chord sequence and then play the lead on top. And that's not something I do very much because it's fraught with all sorts of difficulties, particularly if the tempo is changing very slightly on the night. You can get into all kinds of messes, but we have done it. There's all sorts of possibilities. And the first time I ever did that was the first time we toured, and it was all very experimental, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it didn't. And then I thought, why don't we have one more repeat so we can make 3-part harmony, which always sounds much nicer. I mean, there are 3 notes to the simple chord. So we then introduced the other delay, and the way I usually have it set up is that the next delay is the same distance apart from the second one as the second one was from the first. So that sounds like this. I'll play one note, and this happens. And it's nice in stereo, you know, it's nice for stage because it leaps around the hall. It's quite nice on record too. And that gives you even more possibilities because you can then build up complete chords and you can subtly change them and all sorts of progressions. So I'll give you a little demo of that, just very simply. At the bottom and work up, it always works very well because you can sort of follow yourself up like this. quite
That's
carried away
really
with
good.
that.
Oh, thank you. That
very
really
kind.
sounds like
you.
Queen's sound. You know, I hear that on records, and I hear that when I go and see the band. And it has, I mean, no pun intended, it has got majesty to it, and it has got a kind of traditional, all the way through English music feel about it, hasn't it?
In a way, yes. I love... What really makes me keep wanting to do this is that I just love the sound of the guitar. And from when I started, I always wanted to have guitars in harmony because I just love that sound. I wallow in it, I revel in it. And to have the opportunity to do it is great, you know, and you can do it on record by rolling the tape and keeping on overdubbing different things on different tracks. But it was a dream or an ambition of mine to be able to do that, but also to be able to do it on stage. And I thought, how on earth do you do that without having two other guitarists? And if you have two other guitarists, you have problems because they don't want to do the same stuff as you do anyway, probably. So this is the ideal solution. I can play and that thing can follow me around. And it's a lot of fun. It doesn't always work out right, but then that doesn't particularly worry me because I think, for me, if I go and see a rock show, I want to see people take a few chances, and if they make mistakes, I couldn't really care less. I would go to get those few magic moments.
Magic moments and taking chances. Actually, there's a guy standing in the wings who's been ready to take his chance for the last few minutes. He's going to come on and be our second guitar student. Will you welcome Stuart Ellsworthy?
Yep.
Stuart, welcome to Rock Masterclass. How long have you been playing?
Well, on the electric, only about 18 months, 2 years, but all in all, 10 years previously with just an acoustic.
So you played the acoustic guitar as well?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hand you straight to Brian. Brian, we've seen what you described as the tune of the Pavan. What's Stuart going to do?
Yes, the other one went... Right, this one is sitting underneath. And some of the way it goes parallel, but some of the way it doesn't. Sometimes it'll stay on the same note when the other one's moving, etc. But that's what chords are all about, right? So this one goes... So, you want to give us a blast? Let's do it. Out fine.
So yes. That's the first part of the Pavan. There's a second half as well.
So we'll repeat that line. So we get two of those, and then we'll do the tie-up line, the payoff line, which is this. And your tie-up line is... doing the G open is going to give problems when we turn up. That's the only thing. When you're going, you're going to get this sort of sound. Well, I said it would be better to slide up. Yes, to slide up and stay on the same string. Yeah, I think that would help a lot, actually. So we go. And again, try and keep the other strings damp so that they don't start going... and creeping up on you from behind.
All right. Can you add the drum box to that? And,
yes, let's try it with the drum box. I'll give you a count. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a slightly strange timing because you expect it to be in 4s like most modern music is, but it's in 2s because I suppose of the way that the dance was done, this Pavan dance.
Yeah.
So there tends to be problems, particularly at the beginning. Let's do it together. So we know. Don't forget it goes... Everything's measure for measure. There's no quick notes at the beginning, okay? Let's try it together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Counter 4 between the two lines. It seems to work out better that way. So the first two lines come together with just a 1 counter between, and then we have the 3/4 count for the last one.
So we've added a different line to that, but you've been playing along with that. You're going to play a different line.
Yes, I'm going to play the bottom line, which is the most boring of all, but we'll give it the proper sort of harmonic content. And then if we can get that far, I'd like to do what they used to do in arranging these things, which is take the bottom line and stick it on the top. So you're inverting the whole thing, and the bottom line, with just a few little variations, becomes a new tune. So it sounds like you're doing a refrain, or what people would call a middle eight these days, but in fact you're just turning the whole chord structure upside down, so it'll sound quite different.
What's the best gauge of string for rock playing?
Well, nowadays they sell rock and roll guitar sets of strings anyway, but if you're choosing them from scratch, then I would just choose them fairly light. The reason being that you've got to be able to bend the things, and it depends on how strong your fingers are, to be honest, as to how light you make the strings.
How far do you tend to bend notes?
More or less 1 or 2 or 3 semitones is what I normally do. That I find that the most controllable, and it's still musical at that point. So if we're talking about music like that, so this is 1. That's 1 semitone. 2 semitones is this. And 3 semitones is this. And that's 4, but I don't often use 4 that much, unless you get carried away with a particular thing, and sometimes you just want to squeeze it more and more and more.
Do you find that the bending notes as far as that, up to 2 complete tones, makes them hopelessly out of tune when you come back?
It can do, but it depends on your guitar. That's very much down to the technicalities of your guitar. But I've done a lot on my guitar to minimise this. We've got little rollers on the bridge which turn and give very little friction, and the strings go over at almost no angle at all over the 0th fret. So there's not much friction there either. It does go out of tune a little, even if the strings are worked in, which you have to do anyway. You have to sort of stretch your string to get it worked in. You know, you go, stretch it when you put it on to make sure it's settled down. But even after that, it'll go out of tune if I squeeze it up. And generally, if I take the tremolo through one cycle, it'll bring it up again. And that's another thing which I do instinctively. And somebody told me I did that a couple of years ago. They said, "Why do you always do this in between playing things?" And I suddenly realised that that's what I do without even thinking, just to return things to the proper tuning.
And that gets them back?
It's not a very... It's a fairly subtle effect. I can show you on this. This is the normal open string. Now if I squeeze it hard, I go... which is a lot more than you would normally do. It'll then sound just a little flat.
It's flatter.
And I can... do that with the tremolo, and up it comes again, because it's done one complete cycle and all the friction's taken care of itself.
One of the most noted things about the Queen career, as far as you're concerned particularly, possibly your most famous solo, has to be the one on Bohemian Rhapsody. A classic record anyway, and one that ended up just the end of last year in the Capitol Hall of Fame, right up at the top of that chart of 500 favourite records. But that solo seems to me to have everything that's best about your playing. That poetic, lyrical quality, the sort of striving. How did you develop the solo?
Well, my attitude to solos which are done in that kind of song, which is a real song, is that it should be melodic. It shouldn't be just a yard and a half of Ernie, 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 which is to say that it has to be something which perhaps can complement what the singer was doing, because for a little moment in the song, the guitar is doing the speaking. It's up the front and it's talking to you just the same way as the lead vocal is. So what I like to do is to make the solo part a little tune on its own, which perhaps echoes something which is behind the main tune, but nevertheless stands up as something which you could sing if you go away from the record, you know, so you can sing the storyline of the song, but you could also sing the guitar thing. So that was the first thing. And believe it or not, the solo is, I always try and relate it to the melody, and it does relate to bits of the melody, although it's perhaps a little hard to explain, and it will take a long time to pick it out. And then, having done that, and that seems all very ordered and very cut and dried, it's nice to leave a little point where you can just step out and play what you feel at the moment. Try and keep that spontaneity in. So I knew roughly what I wanted to play. I wanted to go do-do-do-do-do, which fitted the chords, but which was slightly different in emphasis from the main melody line, although it was the same chords. And then I wanted to leave a bit where I could just sort of take off and burn a little and get a little emotional at the end, before coming back to the part where I hand the microphone, as it were, back to the singer. So, I don't know if I can... It's going to sound rather strange without the backing, because it hasn't got the chords to go with it.
There's just so much feeling, so much passion in the way that you play. That must be the most important thing when you play for you.
I'm very keen on getting the emotion in there, yes. And even if it is a set piece, then sometimes you can let rip just in the way that you play it. Even though you're playing the same notes every time, every night, it can come out very different. And that's why it doesn't really worry me that it is a set piece, you know.
But how does somebody set out to try to put feeling into the way they play?
First thing is not to play faster than you can think. If you're out on a limb, you know, what tends to happen is you'll get so far, and then fear will strike itself into you, and you'll just play some sort of cliche which comes out. But the thing to do then is just to slow down, and even stop if you want, and let the music carry on if you can, and then pick it up and play something that you actually feel, and something which comes from the head. It's very corny to say from the heart, but something which you just feel you ought to be playing at the time. It doesn't matter how slow it is or how simple. Just play every note and start it at the right time, do the right things with it, and then leave it when you finish with it and get on to the next.
And in terms of what you can do in settings on the guitar, in settings on the amp, is there any advice you can give in that direction?
I don't really have any secret techniques. I just turn it flat out, really, which is the way that this stuff sounds best. Turn it up until it sounds good.
And yet, on a lot of your playing on Queen albums, when you're really playing something emotional, when you want something warm, it seems to be a rounder, less toppy sound than other times.
Well, that's one of the nice things about this guitar. It can change its sound very dramatically from second to second. I can show you that if you like. It has 3 pickups, all of which have an on-off switch and a phase switch. And if I play you just one pickup for a start, this is the bridge pickup, and it sounds like this. Very sort of wiry, gutty sound.
Yeah.
The next pickup along sounds a little bit more mellow. Then the pickup which is nearest to the fingerboard has a much more mellow sound because it's picking up less of the harmonics and more of the fundamental note of the string, and it sounds like this. It has that nice sort of spoony sound, which I used to hear on the old Gibson SG, which a friend of mine used to have. It really goes... has quite a nice voice to it somehow. So you can use them all together in series and in phase, and they sound very thick, like this. Very thick and very sort of cello-y, and if you turn it up loud, that thickness combined with the slight edge of the amp gives it a really nice cello-y sound, which I've used a lot for the orchestrating things. It sounds like this. I quite enjoy playing with that because you can keep your finger on the string all the time and just really nurture those notes out. You know, it's just like, it's very much, you feel like you're playing a cello with that sort of sound. Now what happens if I keep everything the same, except I'll just reverse the phase of one of those pickups. I'm going to reverse the phase of the middle one, and it makes a very dramatic difference. It sounds like this. So it's got a lot more scream to it now, and it's lost all
very
that
dramatic.
richness. Yes, it's a very different sound, and there's a lot you can do with it. You can play chords as well. It's very, very violent for chords. Really. A real clang to it, and it sounds a little bit like the Beatles' Rickenbackers used to do, I think. This sort of sound. That sort of thing. Excuse me. And that's just by reversing the phase of one of the pickups. The reason it does that is because they all pick up the same note from the string, but they all pick up different amounts of harmonics. And if you make one subtract from the other, then it gets rid of that fundamental note almost completely, and all you get left is the harmonics, all those high notes which make it go... And it's very, very different. And if you do different combinations, one of my favourites is this one, which is fingerboard pickup out of phase with the next one. And this really screams, and it makes all the harmonics come out. And there's a way of dealing with harmonics anyway, which I like to do. But every note can really scream and burst out an octave above like this. And it probably won't work for me now. Which I find really aggressive, and if I want to get something which really bites into people, like we had this song called Death on Two Legs, and I wanted something which would really be incisive and burn into people, and that's the sound I use for that. It's great on the bottom string as well. It goes... It's really can be very angry and very, very nice to play with, and it's the total contrast of, you know, between that and the mellow one.
Brian, I wonder if we can just change round guitars now and ask you a couple of questions about acoustic.
Oh, yes,
there, yeah?
sure.
What's the difference, if you're setting out as a player, if somebody was 17 or 18, what's the difference between playing acoustic and playing electric?
Oh, it's totally different, and it's not something which I'm a real specialist in. I'm not the world's greatest acoustic guitar player. I just learn bits up if I want to play a particular piece for a particular sound. It's very different. I mean, it's a proper polyphonic instrument for a start, and the way I play electric guitar, it's not polyphonic. It's one note at a time most of the time. But this thing, you don't get any distortion, obviously. So you can play the most obscure chords, and they don't distort, which is a different freedom, you know. Things like minor sevenths, you just don't even think of them on the electric guitar turned up loud. It would sound terrible. But on this, it's fine. All that sort of stuff.
I would have thought that it suited your style of playing as well, because it's again, a very emotional instrument, isn't it?
Yes, I like it. It's very different, though. I spent a lot of time at one time in my life learning classical guitar pieces, which I've totally forgotten now. Please don't ask me to play them. But in those things, you get all this polyphonic stuff going on, like the thing that we're playing, but it's all being done by one person, so you can get a certain amount of emotion in it because it's that one person. But also, I found it a bit unsatisfying, because I found that you couldn't get the maximum amount of feeling into every line at the same time, because you're playing, you know, you can't think in three ways at one time. So that sort of led me away from it. You know, we could play this thing on here. We could go... I'm so busy thinking about doing 3 notes, or in fact more than 3 notes at a time, that I'm not getting much feeling into that. You know, it's taken me all my time just to play it. And people like Segovia have it down, obviously. I mean, they can do it. But I still think that the times when I most enjoy Segovia and Julian Bream is when they're going full pelt on a single note. I find some of that very exciting.
Yeah.
And when it gets into the highly technical stuff, where there's going on at the same time as and something going on in the bass, then they can't be putting their full attention to each one all the time. So I find it gets, I'm sure I'll be very criticised for saying this, but I find that it gets a little bit too wooden at times. You know, it's a very different kettle of fish from what I do, but that's just explaining why I drifted away from it.
When you're working on solos away from composition as such, do you work out solos from chords or from scales?
I think I tend to work more from chords because the first 3 or 4 years that I was playing guitar, I was only playing chords. And when I started to figure out how melodies were picked out, I could always see the ghost of that chord shape in my head, and I still do. It's an interesting question. So that's probably where I'm different from a lot of other guitarists who start off playing lead straight away. If I'm playing a solo in A, I'm always thinking of this chord shape, or this, or down the bottom, that. And I can see myself going in and out of the chord. I even think of a scale as being part of a chord, because some notes are in the chord and some aren't. I find that very helpful.
Shall we go to our Pavan?
Yes. We're going to do the first line repeated, and then the last line, right? And I would like, if possible, not to leave too many gaps. So can we do it, otherwise it's going to drag. Can we do it so it goes bum, 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 like that, so it all flows into one piece. And then when we've done it all once, I'll count 4 and we can perhaps do it again. And I would like to try and change my part so that I'm playing on the top instead of the bottom, which is a device which these old anonymous writers of such things did use anyway, and it'll sound like I think quite a different song because the melody line is different on top. Right, so we do one quiet just for practice, and then we'll do the proper thing, okay? With machine, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Should we go for it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Kind of got there.
Well done.
I have to tell you, all the mistakes are from me. I'm sorry.
You've been listening to Brian May on guitar, and it's one of a series of 5 rock masterclasses here on Capital Radio. The programmes have been recorded in front of an invited audience here at the Duke of York's Theatre in London. Thanks tonight go to our student guitarists Julian Hemingway and Stuart Esworthy. But most of all, thanks to Brian May. Thank you. You're great. Thanks a lot. Good luck.